David Johnson runs a company called Australian Super Solutions. He's a really, really high-level dude. I actually first met David at one of our men weekends. Our men weekend, for those of you who don't know, is where we get a whole heap of dudes into one space and we run them through a heap of mental exercises, physical exercises. We pretty much push these dudes to the limit so they can find out what they're actually capable of and teach them a whole heap of strategies so that they can dominate in their life. And I've seen David's progress as he's continually came to our man weekends, and he's just on a massive upward trajectory. And I wanted to get him on here because what he was saying about his company, what they do, is really, really exciting, and I think that it might be able to help out some of you guys. I hope you enjoy this episode because I learned a lot from it. And we're live. Thanks for coming on, sir.
You're welcome, James. Good to be here.
So, mate, what I wanted to start with, first of all, because I'm not going to act like I know anything about superannuation law or anything like that, but the reason, I really want to get you on because it sounds fucking exciting. And what I know about what you do is that you help people utilize their super, which is, trapped pretty much and held at ransom until we're about, 55, 60 these days, and how we can utilize that money to go through and buy a house. Can you run me through, what actually, first of all, what is it that you guys do and, how do you help people?
Yep. So what we do is help create 20% deposits and then 100% finance so they can go and buy a home to live in. So a lot of people are stuck in the rental trap, and we try to rescue them from that trap and liberate them through home ownership. So it's living the Australian dream for the people that do want a home. A lot of people do want a home, but they feel that they're just never going to be able to save the deposit because life costs too much.
Right. And so you're just using the super for that deposit? Exactly.
Not directly, but we leverage their super. And it's a two-step process. So it's what's called an investment and a loan strategy. And we can dive deep into that later on. But that's essentially what we do.
Okay. Well, let's dive deep into that. Let's first of all, I want to know, how did you get started in this?
Okay. So I moved to Australia 10 years ago from New Zealand, if you haven't picked up on my Kiwi accent.
We won't hold that against you.
Thanks. Well, after all, we are Anzacs, right? We fight together. So we're brothers. So my first role was a financial planner for AMP. So I got qualified here in Australia and they wanted me to move to a Brisbane office, but I lived at Currumbin Beach and I didn't want to do an hour commute. So I turned them down and I worked for quite a few boutique local Gold Coast financial planning firms. And I helped hundreds of Australians just improve their retirement outcomes, essentially. Back in those days, for about 5 years in a row, I was helping people go direct into wholesale direct, which just takes away the shop front. So there's 125 superannuation companies in Australia, and they have to make their money, but people can do better for themselves if they know what other options are available to them. And that's the thing, they don't really know what other options are available to them.
Yeah, totally. So can you run us through that?
Yeah, so with the options, so wholesale direct is where the big $1 trillion funds like BlackRock, it's the biggest fund in the world. It's mainly infrastructure globally around the world. It's about $8 trillion. And then you've got Vanguard, I think number 2, is about $5 trillion. And that's where a large portion of people's superannuation is invested. They just don't know. They just don't look at their portfolios and dive deep into, when I ask somebody.
I had no idea about that. That's really concerning because I haven't heard a single good thing about BlackRock recently at all.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a good thing. It's just the reality of the structure the government created when they birthed superannuation in 1992. They believe it's broken now. So they announced in the last budget that they're going to spend $1 billion a year, this year, 2021, through to 31, 10 years, $10 billion to try and fix superannuation. That's how
what's wrong with it?
Well, people aren't getting the money they deserve. What's mainly wrong is 4 out of 5 Australians, over 80% of the countries, millions of people, end up on the pension. The reason they end up on the pension is because we're all living longer. So ladies' average life expectancy is 90, a male is mid to late 80s. And so when you stop working, even at pension age, right now is 67 in Australia, it will be 70 soon, but they're inching it up slowly but surely. You've still got half a lifetime to live if you're healthy. So that's a big issue when you run out of money. So it's not a matter of if, it's just usually a matter of when for the majority of the country, which is really sad. So I'll give you a national statistic. A lady will end up with 157 in balance. So these are national averages. A male will end up with 270 in balance.
Like 270, 157 grand and 207.
$70,000.
70,000 at retirement. Yeah. And these are averages. I mean, some people are doing better, some people are doing worse, but these are just national averages. So you can see how they run out of money eventually if they're, trying to retire for 20, 30 years. So
totally.
It doesn't go very far. So that's why they end up defaulting to the pension. However, the national average for somebody that has invested wisely in an investment property is 780,000. So it's a massive difference. And there's a big sea change in Australia. So in 2019, self-managed super funds became the most popular choice and the biggest space in the entire superannuation industry, having around $750 billion, so $750 billion of money invested in that space today. They are larger than retail and industry. So those two are about 600 billion each, and self-managed super funds are 750. So just slightly, they've just outgrown. So that happened in 2019. So that's when I became aware and alert of that fact. So then I thought, well, that's where the people want to be and want to go. Why? Well, because of leverage. So that is the secret sauce that makes more money for Australians in this country in superannuation world than anything else. And that means that any other investment asset that you have, like shares, like ordinary shares, which most people have a combination of 40% international shares, 40% local shares, and then in their portfolios of their super. And that's great while it goes up, but unfortunately, the nature of the share market has inherent risk. So if you go backwards and look at history, in the last 100 years, there's been a share market crash consistently every 10 to 12 years. So if you go back to February 2020, there was the pandemic coronavirus crisis in the share market. We lost $160 billion, got wiped off the face of the ASX. And unfortunately, that's where people's money was also invested globally and locally. So on average, most Australians lost 20% of the balance of their super fund last February. Now, some didn't do as bad as that. Some did worse, because it depends whether you're 100% in the share market or if you're in a balanced fund. And there's about 5 profiles that people can choose from, but people don't choose. They just don't know. So they don't know what they don't know. So they'll get a job. Their employer, by law, has to pay their super. Was 9.5%. It's increasing to 12.5% eventually over the next few years in front of us. So it's a great compulsory savings scheme. But yeah, people just don't know how super works. It's in the background, so they don't have any emotional attachment to it, because out of sight, out of mind, just like most things in life. If you're not focused on it, you've got no energy with it. So the sad reality is a lot of people have a lot of jobs, but their super starts to get scattered because they don't take their super from one employer to the next. So I think there's billions of dollars of what's called lost super out.
Dude, I remember that, because I had a couple of different ones for whatever reason, and I remember those motherfuckers were just slamming with me with fees until like they were taking home more money than what I was in those cheeky super funds. Like, they're real pricks, aren't they?
Well, it's actually, I'll tell you a couple of things about the super funds in a minute, but what's eating into people's supers that they don't contribute into anymore? They think in their mind, oh, well, I made that money. My super's going to be there at retirement. I'm still going to have $250,000 or whatever. It's going to be there. Wrong. Every superannuation account has compulsory insurances. You've got total permanent disability, you've got life cover, and those types of insurances that are built into your super for your own protection, which is great. But the problem is you've got to pay insurance companies premiums every year out of that super. So if you're not contributing to a super and the premiums coming out, it's pretty much emptying your accounts of all your money over, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So that's the sad, I guess, economic pandemic of super in Australia. But
so that's when we're scattered. So for every single fund that you have, so if you have multiple, because I know people who've got multiple. I used to have like 3 super things. I used to have like Host Plus, Miners, and then something else. And I remember, like each one, it was like you're getting slammed with all these insurances.
Yeah, that's right. It's not built-in insurance. Unless you stop it and do something about it, they're still going to take the money out. So that's sadly what happens. Fortunately, there's lots of companies that are tidying up that lost super, it's called, and then consolidating it and putting it into portfolios. I did that for a few years. I helped build a $400 million fund by doing that exact thing, direct to wholesale. So it was, instead of having the big shop fronts like Australian Super or Q Super or Sun Super, and there's nothing wrong with the super companies because they're only built on a framework that, was designed by the government and the supers to start with. But unfortunately, the big giants and things get carried away when they're unmonitored. So the first people to get caught out was the 4 big banks. Surprise, surprise. Because they had.
Are you telling me we can't trust the banks completely?
Well, it doesn't matter. They got caught out and they got fined. Not that they couldn't afford to pay, millions of dollars in fines, which they did get, because they were, charging people undisclosed fees that they weren't aware of. And that's the nature of all retail sort of supers. They'll get away with what they can get away with. If they don't have to disclose something, they're not going to. So the sad reality is that I found with wholesale, the returns were like twice as much. So back in those days, if someone was getting 8% return, they thought, oh yeah, my super's doing all right, I'm getting 8%. What they didn't know is the investors are getting twice that. They're getting 16%. So you see, if you could, invest directly and reap those same returns personally, because you're direct, that you're almost doubling some of your returns. So, if you think about it over the long term, when someone retires, even doing half as well as some at $500,000, they could have potentially had $1 million. But anyway, my focus has shifted with the rest of the country to support people that want to invest in property from 2019, because leverage makes all the difference in the world, because you can pretty much make twice as much to sometimes 3 times as much money at the end of your working life through a property portfolio. So since 2019, we focused on building portfolios for people. We've got a lot of clients that have a couple of properties now, and examples on our website. They've got $1 million worth of property. We helped them find 2 investment properties last year. They're only in their 40s. They want to have about 6 properties. The exciting thing is, when you turn 60 in Australia, if you choose to retire, you're allowed to live off your rental income tax-free. So if you're bringing in $1,000 a week in rent, well, that's like earning $1,500 as a small business owner, isn't it? But you don't have to work for the money. It's just coming in passive income. So we're really liberating people's, retirement through that financial freedom pathway. And it's really exciting. And we're just getting lots of happy clients that can just see the reality of making money. Now, right now, obviously property is hot, and so people are making ridiculous returns, but we look at the long term, what's going to happen over the next 20 years or what happened in the last 20 years, so we can sort of see where the future's lying. But right now in today's climate, it's really good to get into property. The reason being is the RBA, the Reserve Bank of Australia, are maintaining interest rates at a low level, and that's not going to be changing anytime soon. 3 to 5 years in front of us is a fantastic window to own property. And, the saying goes, the rising tide raises all ships. So the whole country is going up in value right now. And when the interest rates do turn, as they say, that when the worm turns, it's going to turn slowly. Like, they only move the rates 0.25% per quarter. So 1% increase is going to take 12 months. And you're going to see that coming. And I wouldn't be concerned about the effect of interest rates in front of us. And even when it does change, whenever that's going to be, because no one can predict the future, it's not going to matter, because, the biggest insurance policy for a property, if you ever had to, you just sell it, and then you realise the profit you've made, and you're ahead. So that's the insurance policy for anyone that owns property.
Yeah,
and then.
Sweet. So just quickly, just to move back, like the thing that I was like really intrigued by was like using your super to actually buy property. And so for a lot of dudes, like I've got a lot of mates and they live in Sydney. Okay. And in case you don't know, living in this beautiful state of Queensland, Sydney is fucking expensive, right? Sydney is ridiculous. I mean, everywhere is getting ridiculously insanely expensive. And like saving up for a deposit's crazy, because paying for rent is crazy enough, like with all the bills that we've got. And the thing that really intrigued me about like what you were doing, and the thing that I really liked about it, was the fact that you're able to actually use your super to go in and actually buy a home. Now, are you able to use the super and then buy and like live in that home as well? Are you allowed to do that?
No, so that's illegal. You're not allowed to get personal benefit from your superannuation until you retire. However, what we provide people is what's called an investment and loan strategy. So they're 2 separate things which you are allowed to do. So I'll explain. When you get an investment property, it's inside a super universe with super rules. It's quite different to buying a home outside of super. And so when you set up a self-managed super fund, and you're allowed to roll over your money from a retail or industry fund into your own. Now, it's very similar to a family trust. So it's usually under your own surname. That's what you would name it. And it's a legal entity to protect your assets. So it can be any type of investment assets. And obviously, property is one of many assets you can choose. But it is the only one that you're allowed to invest under the guise of the government rules that has leverage. And that's really the secret sauce of how to grow wealth in an accelerated fashion because of leverage. So to give you an example, if you had $150,000 in traditional super and you were getting 7% per annum over a 15-year period, you'd have $413,000 at retirement. You use that same $150,000 as a deposit on a $450,000 townhouse, and the townhouse is still going up at the same 7% per annum. After 15 years, you're going to have an asset with $1.241 million. So those two side by side, same money, but used in a different way. You've just made 3 times as much money, $800,000 more that you would have missed out on by just sitting on your hands doing nothing. You can actually jump onto any of your superannuation accounts today, and they will tell you how much money you're going to have when you finish working. So they have all these calculators online, and the sad reality is you actually know that you're only going to end up with 400 and something thousand, for example, in that example. So property is definitely the way to go if it's the only vehicle that allows you to get 2 to 3 times as much money. Did that example make sense?
Yeah, totally. So you can go out and you can, instead of going and having to put, all the money down on the house and pay 500 grand, or if in the case of what you're using, you have $150,000, you can put that 150,000 into shares if you want to do it in a traditional super way, or you can take that 150, leverage it. So take out a mortgage on a house, borrow 300K, put 150 down. You've got 30% equity in that house. You own 30% of it, but the 450,000 is what you're going to make the profit on. So You're going to make a rental return. Plus on top of that too, you're also going to get your capital growth where you're going, your house is going to go up. And what did you say? It was going to end up being 1.124 million or something like that?
1,241,000 versus 413,000. So the reason I know those figures so well is because we have an example on a slide deck that we show people to teach people about leverage. And then, so last year, we were obviously helping people build investment property portfolios, but then we came across a shared equity solution, which was what we do now full time, which is Home Buyer Accelerator Program. And that program shows people how to set up a self-managed super fund. It's all a done for you service. They don't have to do anything, but we will do that for them. And
love that ringtone.
Ringtone. And so we set them up the self-managed super fund, and then we show them an investment. It's called a property trust. And the good thing about property trusts, they're quite common. They're in most superannuation accounts already. And so our one has over 100 properties in it, and they're getting a really good return. So the good thing about investing money into a property trust is that it's low risk because it's just residential properties, and they're spread, which is diversification, which reduces your risk across every state of Australia. And like I said, you'd be, say, a unit shareholder, you'd have a little slice of over 100 properties. So they've never had a default. There's never been an issue with the fund. It's 10 years old now. So they've been creating deposits for 10 years, which is fantastic. And then once you've got your return and that's happening, it's just a temporary investment. They have a lending arm. And that with that lending arm, they will create a personal loan, which represents the 20% deposit that we create for people. So then they will go and get the other 80% from the bank. So they have a panel of lenders. And so we get 100% finance solution for people, but all they've done is an investment, and then they get a loan, and then they go and buy a home.
Awesome. That's fucking unreal, man.
Yeah, it's awesome. So it's really exciting. So people are already in their homes, living in their new homes now, and they're very grateful. And really, it's changed their lives because a lot of people just, I guess, give up and think, I'm just going to be renting forever. So they'll go and buy a brand new car and maybe get into a little bit more credit debt than they should, but they don't care because they think they're never going to own a home. As soon as we educate them and enlighten them on what they're entitled to and what can work for them, then they just completely have a change of mindset, and they get really excited and they close all their credit cards, get rid of the zip pays and the afterpays, and go, no, I really want to save and do what I can towards their home. But they're just really excited because it's just an opportunity that they didn't realize was available, because shared equity, that type of concept loan's been available in Australia since the 1980s, but it was in the domain of commercial lending only. And now we're bringing it into the domain of the public. So everyday hardworking Australians can take advantage of this loan solution and our whole program, holistic program, and buy a home to live in, leveraging their super in a legal way that's also approved by the ATO. It's been audited 4 times last year, and was approved with flying colours. So it's a great solution for Australians.
So in this way, we can actually get one where we can leverage our super to actually get a home.
Exactly, because you're just doing an investment, and that same company will give you a personal loan to create the deposit and get the rest of the finance. So they're two separate things. One is just a standard superannuation investment through your self-managed super fund, which we obviously teach people about how that works. And then the loan is the other side of the coin, so to speak, and that's got nothing to do with their super. That's why it's legal.
So then we say, let's go through and so you move forwards from that. And let's say that you want to start getting like investment properties as well. That means that you can actually get investment properties which may be outside of superannuation land.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Right. I am baiting you a little bit here. We'll admit, but like, so we can actually get money, which is like, so we can utilize our super, we can leverage from that, and then we can start making income, which is outside of our super, based from the money which was first in our super, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, so you just, I guess it's the words compartmentalize. So you just have them in a separate container. So you've set up your self-managed super fund with your financial advisor and planner, and then you've made your investment, and then that you can forget about that, and then until you pay out the deposit loan, which I can go into a bit more detail. So what happens after about 3 years, you just refinance the home you're living in, and you pay out that deposit loan. So then your super comes back, but because it's returning around 10%, let's say, for example, you put in $150,000, you'd be pulling out about $195,000, $200,000 in 3 years' time. So you've made a nice little sum of profit on your returns as well. And then what people do with that money, they could put it back into their traditional super or into just a private share portfolio through their financial advisor. But the most popular choice is to actually just recycle that whole loan again, like you just said, and buy an investment property. So that's exactly what people want to do and do, because it's leverage and people feel more comfortable with property than shares because people understand property. It's pretty simple. We all live in a home, don't we? So we all understand what a property is, whereas shares can be quite complicated.
Totally. Well, I mean, my old man taught me the rule is like, you don't dabble in shares, because if you're working, like there are people whose whole lives are in shares, right? And doing that. And it's like, if you dabble in that, of course they're going to take your money, because a lot of the time, apparently so, I've been led to believe, I could be totally incorrect, but a lot of the time shares can be a bit of a zero-sum game, where in order for somebody to win, somebody has to lose. I might be, some.
No, that's true. It is zero-sum. So I was a trader of foreign exchange for 2 years. So that's some of my experience as well. And I've been involved in derivatives and options and all sorts of instruments of investment over my lifetime. However, there is inherent risk with those, and there is risk with property as well, but it's a lot less. So you can actually just do the calculations, and property has a lot less risk just because of the nature of property, how it behaves compared to the share market. It doesn't have the big, roller coaster ups and downs. I mean, that's what's required to capture daily earnings. Is you do need a lot of volatility, they call it, and you need that. So you need that movement. That's great if you're a day trader, and depends on your method, whether you're long-term, like 2-week trades like the institutions like banks do, or it could be right down to 5 1-minute trading if you want to, high frequency trading. But yeah, so just trying to think of what was your statement just before about that?
I actually wanted to circle back to one thing you said at the start. The government's putting $10 billion over the next 10 years into fixing super. So what's broken?
Well, I think the risk of loss, because people they don't have enough at retirement. So the statistics are out, like, people just don't have enough in balance to last, so they end up defaulting to the pension. Because I'm sure the government, I think last count, they spend around $38 billion a year paying out the pension every year, and they preferred not to do that because they wanted the Australian worker to be self-funded, so independent. But it didn't work because of the big giants getting too greedy, as usual, and just taking too much money off the table, not giving it back to the individual member. So it's all
when we're talking about the big giants, what we're talking about, the guys who are the big funds?
Yeah, I mean, you think about CBUS, for example. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a great fund. I mean, I work with a lot of builders and construction guys, and they're all members of CBUS, for example. You've heard of CBUS?
Yeah.
But, who pays for their television advertising, and who pays for sponsoring stadiums? I mean, where do you think all that money comes from that they advertise with and carry on? I mean, it's coming from the bottom line, but it's just not a fair distribution of profits back to the members. That's all.
So so what I'm taking it from there is you're saying is that when we go through and we invest with CBAS, then instead of all of our money being put to work in terms of putting into shares or being invested in various ways to get the highest return, we actually get a large number of fees being taken out of that to go through and to fund the marketing and fund all that sort of stuff. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, of course. So they'll either be declared fees or, the way they do their internal workings, like the banks have been caught out. So there was a Royal Commission, and that's where the government investigate the banks, right? If you heard of those. And then they went in and they, all got found out about charging undisclosed fees and just not being fair to the members. So what happened? All the banks divorced themselves from superannuation because they thought, we can't get away with this anymore. We don't want anything to do with it because the banks are hardcore. So like, for example, BT was the super that was attached to Westpac. They've got nothing to do with BT anymore. They've gone their own way. Same with ANZ and One, and they're not involved with superannuation anymore. So that was just because they really got caught out. But that was quite a few years ago, and it took time to unwind all that. So that's a concern, isn't it? If they don't,
just a little.
but at the end of the day, at least there is super. Just people can do better for themselves. So you're still going to make some money in super as long as you keep it together and don't let it get scattered. And as long as, it's good if people just start to look at it and just look at, shop around, just have a look, what other options are there? Just, open your eyes to other possibilities. That's all. Just not accept what you're given. Really, you need to, hopefully after listening to this conversation, it's highlighted people's, they're a bit more alert on what's out there.
You piqued my interest when you said that I'll get triple the amount of money back if I go and die.
Potentially, we can show. It's just math. Obviously, no one can predict the future, but it's just common sense, and leverage is leverage, and the facts are the facts. So, you will make a lot more money through property than traditional super, because that's just the national statistics. They're just the facts. All I'm doing is sharing facts, really.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome, man. Dude, this has been really, really insightful. If anyone is interested in doing this and they want to learn more, whereabouts can they find out more about what you do?
Yep. So our website's superpropertysolutions.com.au, and the Home Buyer Accelerator program is where we teach people how to leverage their super to create a deposit and finance to buy a home to live in. So that's the most popular program that we offer right now, obviously, because if anyone's out there renting and working full time and has over $150,000 in balance, they've got every chance of qualifying to get a home for themselves.
Unreal. Thanks for your time, man.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you, dude.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed the video. If you got something out of it and you want to learn more, click the link below or type in High Performance Conversations with James Cant, and you'll be able to check out all the podcasts that we've done. We cover a stack of different topics, everything from getting your mojo back, overcoming anxiety, self-doubt, self-esteem, and learning from some of the industries and some of the world's top performers in both business and in health. Look forward to having you on there.